Welcome, everybody. We are just waiting for people to join and we will endeavour to start on time. Thank you for joining us. We're really excited about this launch today. In the meantime, please do take some time to introduce yourself in the chat and tell us where you're from and where you're calling in from today. Thanks, Stephanie. Welcome. Buenos dias. Oh, hello, everyone. So good to have you here. So we have, I'll just make one more minute and then I think we'll get started. Okay, it's a minute past our starting time, so I'm going to officially open this exciting and wonderful webinar. So welcome everybody for joining from around the world to be with us today. I am Elizabeth Dartnell, the Executive Director of the Sexual Violence Research Initiative, and it's so exciting to have you with us for the launch of our new online course. It's not just the S3I's course, of course. It's a creation of multiple partners called The Power of Participation, Introduction to Participatory Approaches for Childhood Sexual Violence Research. And as I mentioned, this course is the result of a really wonderful collaboration between ourselves, TEDOM, the Netherlands, the University of Central Lancashire's Connect Centre for International Research on Interpersonal Violence, and the University of Bedfordshire's Safer Young Lives Research Centre. Thank you, everybody that has collaborated on this work. And I'm really delighted to say that we have been able to bring this to you through support from the Oak Foundation. So before we begin, I just want to share some few housekeeping points. Interpretation services are available in Spanish and French. All you need to do to access those services is to click the globe icon at the bottom of the screen and select your preferred language. The session is being recorded and we will share the recording and all the resources that have been talked about today after the webinar. Just to note, I am removing any AI note takers as this meeting is being recorded and the information will be shared with you. And as you are doing, please continue to introduce yourself in the chat, post your questions using the Q&A box. We won't be able to address the questions if they're shared in the chat. So please use the Q&A box again at the bottom of your screen. And we'll respond to the questions during the session, or if we're not able to address all the questions that have been shared in the Q&A box, we'll try to endeavour to do so after the event. Also, as you listen and get excited, hopefully, about this wonderful new course, please also share some of your resources and materials that you think might be of interest and relevance to others that are with us today in this webinar. So I have the opportunity now to take a few reflections about this course before we begin. Over the past few years, many of our members within the S4I network, our partners within the work that we are developing now, as well as folk that have come to our events, have repeatedly told us that while they recognize the importance of involving children and young people in research, they're often either not confident or unsure of how to do this in a way that is ethical, meaningful, and safe. So this course has really been developed in response to that gap. It's been designed to support you as researchers, practitioners, advocates, funders, to really think about how to better involve children in research and knowledge building. and not to involve them just as research subjects or research participants, but as people with perspectives and experiences that can and will shape stronger evidence and better responses and prevention programs for child sexual violence. We know that too often, for a whole variety of reasons, we exclude children from decisions and processes that directly impact them. But we also know that if we meaningfully involve children in research and knowledge building, we really gain better and deeper insights that are more relevant and grounded in evidence. And we know that these interventions are much more effective when we engage young children directly in the research process. But just to remind us all here today that participation isn't just a method, it's about recognizing children's rights to be heard and to be part of the work being done to prevent and respond to child sexual violence. This course, I'm so delighted to say, is a tool that provides practical examples and reflections from people already doing this work. And we hope it will be able to support you in thinking how to do this research well and evidence building well, to think what your current research approaches and methodologies, and to help guide the way in which you undertake research and knowledge building. But also to think about the importance of engaging experts and expert knowledge builders who have engaged children and young people ethically in their research processes. So before I hand over to Nellie, I just really want to thank all of our partners and contributors for such your generosity. It's been a delight working with you on this, for your time, your expertise, and commitment you have brought to this project in almost record time. So thank you. So today we're so pleased to share the course with you today, and we look forward to hearing from you how you use it in your work, how you find it, how can we strengthen it. So please do give us feedback. So on that note, I really am super pleased to be handing over to you, Nellie Zembe. Nellie is a researcher, a practitioner, originally from Zimbabwe, but now in South Africa. Nellie currently leads the Planning, Monitoring, Evaluation and Learning Department at Africa Tikkun. And another big congratulations, has recently completed your PhD at the University of Johannesburg. So big congratulations to you, Nellie. So over to you, Nellie. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz, and welcome everybody to this live webinar launch of SVRI's latest free and online course, Power of Participation. Like you've just heard from Liz, I think the name of the webinar resonates. It's really the power of participation that we're going to be discussing today. I'm very happy to be moderating today's session, and those of you who do decide to do the course, which I hope it's everybody, you will see my face. I am the speaker on the lecture video on Module 4 on data analysis, and I'm also featured in the Perspectives video where I talk a little bit about setting up a project here with my organization where I worked with junior social researchers. In today's session, however, we will hear a bit about the course from the team who built the course. We'll give you a quick look into what the course is about, somewhere in the middle, and we'll also give you a chance to post any questions that you might have, and you will get direct responses in that panel. So just getting straight into it without any further ado, let's dive in and hear from our panelists. So to kick off the discussion with a question, I'm going to kick off the discussion with a question for each of you, and I will introduce each panelist before they speak, so you can anticipate who they are and what their background is with this module right beforehand. For the audience, there will also be time for you to answer some of your questions, for the panelists to answer some of your questions. However, the Q&A function has now been opened, so as they present, you can put in your questions there. They will be monitored and answered. Most of the questions will be answered there in text, and we will select a few questions to bring into the discussion later on in the webinar. If you have any questions, please do make sure to put it there in the Q&A. The first question, for the first question, I'm going to turn to Joanne. Dr. Joanne Nyagi is a researcher specifically on the topic of child sexual violence at the CVRI and has been on the project. She's been the project lead on the development of this course for CVRI. Joanne, could you give us a bit of background to explain why CVRI developed a course on participatory approaches and why participatory approaches are actually important?
Thank you so much for the introduction, Nelly, and welcome to all our participants to this webinar. So I'm very excited to take you through why this course is essential and how it responds to critical capacity needs in the field. So at the SVRI, we are constantly exploring ways to strengthen capacity in the field of violence against children research. And in 2023 September, we conducted a global survey to gather insights from our members on what they felt was most needed for strengthening childhood sexual violence research capacity. The response was overwhelming. We received 234 replies from 51 countries, with a significant majority from low and middle income countries, about 70% or thereabout. What's also important to note is that majority of the respondents were practitioners. So this course is not just for researchers, but also practitioners. And in the survey, we asked respondents to select their top 2 priorities out of 6 research areas that we had identified in consultation with our grantees. And the results were very clear that participatory research and meaningful engagement of children, adolescents, survivors, and community was by far the top priority, selected by 54% of the respondents as their first choice and 24% as their second choice. So in total, this means that nearly 3/4 of the respondents identified participatory CSV research as a critical area for capacity strengthening. And we didn't stop there. We took the survey further and asked respondents to specify the kinds of skills and knowledge that they were interested in. And many emphasized the need for hands-on practical guidance, including guidance on how to conduct survivor-centered and youth-led research, how to involve children in CSV without overwhelming them, in CSV research without overwhelming them or overburdening them, and how to enhance community ownership of data and decision-making, as well as how to apply participatory methods such as photo voice, among others, in meaningful and ethical ways. And with these insights, we worked together, we collaborated together in partnership with Terre des Hommes, the University of Bedfordshire, and the University of Central Lancashire to develop our new online course on child participation in CSV research. So this course is in direct response to what researchers, practitioners, and advocates told us they needed. And they told us that they needed practical tools, ethical guidance, and inspiring examples to ensure children's participation in research is meaningful, not tokenistic, not extractive, and above all, safe. And you will see this throughout the course. So today we are incredibly excited to launch this course and invite everyone to be part of a growing movement that values and centers children's voices in ending childhood sexual violence. So thank you very much, and over to you, Nelly.
Thank you, Joanne. So as Joanne has clearly emphasized, there's clearly a demand for resources to support participatory research. So the next question is for somebody who has published a raft of helpful guides and resources of doing participatory research with children, Associate Professor Camille Warrington. Camille has led and supported the program of participatory research activities within the Safer Young Lives Research Center at the University of Bedfordshire. One part of this was setting up and running the Young Researcher Advisory Panel for YRAP. In the course, you hear more about the YRAP members from several countries. You also hear Camille talk more about the project because she was the lead in developing Module 2. So Camille, I'm hoping you can help us make sure we all start from the same page and understand the scope of child and youth participation in research. Now, when we've been talking about the course and participatory research, most people's minds jump straight to think about focus group discussions and creative methods like photo voice. But I think the course takes a much wider view. So before we go any further, when we talk about participatory approaches in the course, what exactly are we talking about?
Thank you, Nelly. And I think that's a really, really helpful question and starting point, and really important because there's a lot of rhetoric around the language of participation and it can be used in lots of different ways. And I think helpfully, the first point I'd make is reiterating what Liz has said and alluded to in the introduction, that when we're not just talking about children taking part in research, participation in research as subjects, maybe as interviewees or survey respondents, what we're focused on in this course is what we're calling participatory approaches, by which we mean opportunities to enhance children's influence in all aspects of the research process and widening the scope for children to inform not just what we're learning, but how we're doing it as well. And I think the second part that I'd talk about, which again, you helpfully kind of alluded to in the question, is that we're trying to take a really broad scope and look through children's involvement at every stage of the research cycle. So as you said, and Joanne mentioned, we often think about things like photo voice and youth advisory groups when we hear those words, participatory research approaches, and think about them with children. And they're absolutely represented in this course. So module 4 focuses on data collection, and we've got some lovely examples of photo voice and other creative projects there. Module 2, which is about research development, talks about youth advisory groups. So they are represented there, but it is broader than that. What we're trying to encourage is a recognition and a confidence to think about participation at every stage of the research cycle. So right from the beginning at research design, and we've got some examples of a case study of how research can emerge from projects that children themselves have initiated. They might not be research projects, it might be an advocacy or a support project, but we've got some lovely examples of how young people with lived experience identified priorities and then were part of defining the research question for which funding was then identified. We've then got other examples from other parts of the research cycle. So an example from Thailand that talks about a children's advisory group informing and strengthening the data collection tools and working with researchers to really change how they asked questions to other children in research. And there's even at the end of that research cycle, there's some reflections on projects that have done collaborative writing with children and young people and other knowledge exchange and impact. So I think that's really key to how we define it, both recognizing this is about maximizing children and young people's influence beyond simply being subjects of research, but also recognizing it in broad terms across the whole scope of the research cycle. I'll hand back to you there, Nelly.
Thank you, Camille. It's quite clear that participation happens at different levels and at any stage of the research cycle from what you're explaining. So given these infinite possibilities, and I can anticipate the complexity of doing, running participatory approaches, this topic could get quite overwhelming for somebody who's trying to actually do participatory research. And this is why I'm going to turn to Dr. Claire Cody to help. Like Camille, Claire is also from the Safer Young Lives Research Center, where she's a senior research fellow and has been managing the Our Voices program of work over a decade now. She has also run a bunch of multi-country research and action projects on childhood sexual violence. Claire, given all the work and excellent examples of participatory research from the field, how did you and the team manage to work out what should and shouldn't be included in this course?
Thanks, Nelly. Yeah, that's a great question. And as you know, there's lots of really excellent examples out there of toolkits, papers, resources around participatory research with children, young people, and communities. So in recognizing that, we took a three-prong approach to developing the course content. So firstly, building on the work of SVRI and their initial survey, Kimberly, one of our colleagues at TDH, led a needs assessment to really understand a bit further what people really wanted to see, what kind of content they really wanted to get out of this course. And we had over 70 responses to that, which was great. It allowed us to really prioritize and think about the different formats to use. Secondly, Camille actually also led a resource mapping exercise. So we put a call out to our networks to try to identify existing resources that we could really draw on as part of developing that course. And again, we had over 100 responses of different resources, which really helped us develop that foundation. And then thirdly, we identified a group of individuals, so 14 individuals, who we brought together to form the content advisory group. And that was really, really helpful. So those individuals included PhD students, professors, practitioner researchers, who all had a lot of experience of carrying out participatory research, particularly in this field and in very different contexts as well. So again, we really could draw on their expertise. They could guide us in terms of different case studies, different speakers we could bring together for the course. So that was really helpful. And I personally found it really helpful as a reality check as well. That group were really great at saying, let's keep this realistic, thinking about the breadth and depth and remembering that it is an introduction to the area, and therefore we couldn't cover everything. So their guidance in helping us think about what was most useful was really central to developing the course. And I should also say that we recognize there are a lot of other useful resources out there. And so through the modules, we have guided people to different references and resources if they do want to dig a bit deeper into certain elements, which we hope will be useful. And then finally, I think it's also really important, as I said, to remember that this is an introduction. Hopefully, as a team, we've worked together to really try to identify the key concepts and considerations that we found useful in our work in this field. But it's important to remember that we can't include everything, every scenario, every circumstance. And so it's important for those who are doing the course to really think about this doesn't replace the kind of broader knowledge, skills and training that's required to undertake ethical research with children and young people, particularly around these topics. And I think, as we've highlighted at different points so far in this webinar, if people are looking to do this work, it's really important to seek out that guidance and support from others who have more experience to really help if we're looking to initiate and facilitate these projects. Because as you'll see, if for those of you that go on to do the course, it does require a lot of deep thinking, a lot of planning, and a lot of resources as well. So I think that's also a really important element that we've kind of kept maintained through the course.
Thank you, Claire. I think when we do the course, we have the comfort of knowing that, it's been streamlined. There's a way that the content has been put together. What I'm actually going to do now is to get into briefly talking about how the course is structured. So far, we've gained a bit of an idea about what some of the choices were that were made in shaping the power of participation. Now is the moment for us to let you know what is actually in the course. I was casting my eye into the chat a little bit, and I could see some questions showing excitement about the course. On the screen now, you will be able to see what the course looks like once you have registered and started. Please note that this is the English version, and the course is also available in a French version. I'll give you a snippet about what content to expect in each of the modules, and as we go through the modules, please take part in the poll, and the poll should pop up in your chat, and we'll let you know which modules you're most curious about. So in module 1, you will learn about the history of participatory research and some fundamentals of child participation. This will give you a theoretical foundation to be able to explain the move from research on children to researching with children. So Camille had started to speak about this earlier, and there'll be more details around this in module 1. In the second module, the starting points for participatory research are discussed, with a focus on considerations and things to think about and plan for in the first steps of the research cycle, when finding partners, planning and designing a participatory research project. The third module covers safety, well-being and ethics, areas that were clearly flagged as a need in the needs assessment and by the content advisory group. In the module, you will get to think about the well-being of children and youth participants, but importantly also the well-being of adult members in the research team. Module 4 is really about participatory approaches to the data collection and the data analysis steps of the research cycle. And then finally, module 5 closes the loop and covers how children and youth can effectively be part of the write-up process. So being part of writing up research products and using them to drive change. You will also, in this module, be challenged to think about how to wrap up activities with the children and youth who would have been part of the research projects and close participatory projects in a healthy way. Each of these modules, for those of you that are wondering, each of them takes about 3 hours to complete. All of them have a mix of contents which have been designed to give you an introduction to the key concepts and theory, some perspectives from the field, and some exercises to also help you reflect and apply what you have learned in your own role and context. So let's have a look at what parts you are most looking forward to based on the poll results. Fantastic. So it seems the subject of planning and designing participatory research has a bigger interest there, as well as safety and well-being of ethics, followed by data collection and analysis. And then we also have quite a large interest in sharing, dissemination, and advocacy. So that last module 5, and then you've got module 1. But you see there's big interest in all of the modules, because I think, as you would have picked up, they also go together. Once you've done one, you'll probably find the need to do another module because they are very well structured. Now that we've seen what you're looking forward to, learning about, I'm reflecting on my own journey actually with participatory approaches. And like Claire said, there's quite a lot out there, but so much is just on paper. It's written about, and sometimes it's quite hard to translate it into the practical bits. I often have to rely on learning on the job. So now you're faced with actually doing it when trying to incorporate these methods into the research process. I'm going to ask Professor Sylvie Bovanek the next question. So Professor Sylvie is from the Institute for Social and Organizational Pedagogy at Stiftung University in Germany. Sylvie was part of the research team and took the lead on developing Module 5. You also hear throughout the course about the Small Steps study, where Sylvie worked with a group of young women in Albania who had been trafficked through childhood and exposed to sexual harm. Sylvie, how will people doing this course get an idea of the practical aspects of putting participatory approaches into practice?
Thank you, Nelly. This is a really valid question. And as you know, the origins of participatory approaches date back several decades. And as Claire mentioned earlier, the research mapping exercises actually turned up a rich bank of resources. But despite this, there really is still quite a big gap in terms of practical know-how. And as Liz mentioned at the beginning, few researchers really feel that they have the necessary expertise or confidence to meaningfully and safely engage children and youth in child sexual violence research. So this course really seeks to address this gap by collating very practical tips on how to implement participatory approaches in this field. The course offers 10 videos. You will see Q&As with young people, researchers, and practitioners who talk about their first-hand experience of undertaking youth participatory research in this field. The course shares insights from 18 different countries. Most of these represent lower and middle income settings. We have included different case studies of projects from diverse contexts engaging different groups of children and youth. And there is an overarching case study called Small Steps to illustrate that young people really can take a leading role throughout the research cycle. And in this particular case study, a group of young women in Albania conducted some peer research to explore access to justice and support after experiences of trafficking. So the course discusses the type of training, support, and facilitation that underpinned this highly participatory study, but we also discuss some of the really very complex ethical considerations and questions that we grappled with. For example, when engaging youth in dissemination and advocacy activities. And in the context of a highly sensitive topic like child sexual violence, issues around stigma, confidentiality, and anonymity are obviously really critical to consider. And my colleague Helen Beckett will speak more to this point in a few minutes. But returning to your question, Nelly, the course provides really practical guidance also through demonstration videos. And these feature a range of exercises that you can do with children and youth, like, for example, the river walk exercise that you can use at the end of the project, cycle to acknowledge what participants have achieved, but also it serves as a child-friendly evaluation tool that kind of allows you to elicit children and young people's views on what worked well and what maybe didn't work so well for them, and as well as creating a space for children and young people to provide feedback, which obviously in itself is really significant. This can also allow you to further advance your participatory research practice. So in summary, the course was very much designed to give hands-on practical guidance and to share some tried and tested participatory approaches from around the world that you can hopefully easily adapt to the context of your specific research project if you are keen to engage children and youth in child sexual violence research.
Thank you, Sylvie. I'm now especially excited to go through the demonstrations and cases for myself and for my work. Now, we're going to turn to an aspect of participatory projects, especially research projects with children and with those who have difficult life experiences. My final question is going to be for Professor Helen Beckett. Helen is a professor of social policy and social work at the Connect Center for International Research on Interpersonal Violence and Harm at the University of Central Lancashire. She's also very familiar with working with Camille, Claire, and Sylvie, having been the director of the Safer Young Lives Research Center in the past. She has decades of experience in working with children, youth, and researchers on the topic of childhood sexual violence and thinking about issues of safety, well-being, and ethics around this. Helen, many people feel very intimidated by the safeguarding and ethical considerations related to participatory research. How is this covered in this course?
Thanks, Nelly. Yeah, that is a big concern for people. It's always a big concern for us when we're doing the research as well. And so it's a key theme throughout the course. And we start kind of from Module 1, introducing some of this, but Module 3 really unpacks a little bit more about how do we think about safety and well-being. And I suppose the starting point for that is having to accept that we can't guarantee no harm will take place as a result of someone taking part in our research, because there are too many things beyond our control. But that absolutely does not mean that we don't do our best to minimize any risk of harm, to make sure appropriate support is in place, and also to maximize any benefits that there might be for young people taking part. And one of the ways in which we can do this is about kind of really embedding ourselves in thinking about trauma. And so we introduce in the course a trauma-informed approach. And what does this mean in the context of research? Now, when we say that, that may feel a little bit intimidating. I'm not a trauma expert, but people don't have to be a trauma expert to be able to work in a trauma-informed way. And the things we talk about in the course is it's about understanding trauma. It's about understanding how it might show up in how people engage with us. And it's about recognizing that sometimes we'll know the trauma that people have experienced when they're taking part in our research, and sometimes we won't. So it's really important to be mindful about all the unknown experiences of trauma that might be there and think about how we deal with that in any research, no matter who we're engaging. And it's about working in a way then that really recognizes the importance of trauma-informed principles like choice, control, safety. And very often those things are seen nearly in contradiction with each other. But in the course, we explore how actually choice and control can help encourage safety. So we think about that relationship. So Module 3 looks at this in a couple of different sections. We start by just generally thinking about safety and well-being issues, and how can we think about those within participatory research. And then we go on to think about, well, what are the additional concerns that there are when actually we bring people together in a group scenario? For example, managing anonymity or confidentiality is very different in a group than it is one-on-one. And thinking about managing distress or managing disclosure in a group context isn't just the person it's affecting, but it's how it impacts everyone else in the group as well. So we think about those things. And as Nellie really importantly said earlier on, we also think about how do we look after ourselves. Far too often, we're so focused on participant well-being, which we absolutely should be, but not to the expense of forgetting about looking after ourselves as researchers. So we think a little bit about that as well. And then the other issue that we look at then in Module 3 is ethics. And oh my goodness, so many times when we talk about participatory research and childhood sexual violence, people say, but our ethics committee won't let us do this, and there's ethical barriers. So we have a section thinking about navigating ethics procedures practically, but we also, all of us really understand ethics as a much bigger thing. This is not about policies and procedures. It's about how we ethically practice in the field. And we unpack some of the ways in which you can do that. And like all of the other modules, we also give you links to other resources, other people who've been doing things really well. For example, in this module, we link you to ERIC, Ethical Research Involving Children website, that has a wealth of resources of people who've tried to do this type of work well. So that's kind of, we start to unpack that in the course, and we hope that it provides you as a good starting point to think about how you might think about safety, ethics, and well-being as you go further along your journey around this. Thanks, Nellie.
Thank you, Helen. I'm getting the sense that you thought about everything in the structure of this module. So really excited, and there's clearly a big interest on this topic. So we can now officially launch the Power of Participation. The Power of Participation course that was designed by these award-winning participatory researchers with insights, perspectives, and input from all around the world. This introductory course will help you explore why and how you might use participatory approaches when researching childhood sexual violence together with children and youth, and to do so in any ethical and meaningful way. So the course link has been shared, the course registration link. We hope you're ready to learn, think carefully, and be inspired. But as you will learn going through the course materials, there are lots of benefits. There are also a lot of complexities to navigate around ethical practices, like Helen was pointing out, working with children and youth and working with trauma. So while this course is a starting point, you need to make sure you have the right knowledge, skills, support, and supervision in place before embarking on this participatory journey. The course is hosted on the Thinking platform. The link to register is shared in the chat. Please go ahead and register so you can start the course. Make sure you also have a look at all of the other free SVRI courses that are available on the SVRI website. I'm going to hand over to Joanne for question and answers.
You're going to hand over to me. I'll come
to
in.
Jean. Okay. Jean.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody who's been putting questions in the chat. Please do send more. Some were quite basic, so around how you access the course and whether you'll get a certificate at the end. So we will be sharing in the chat the links for you to go to the Thinkific platform, where you'll be able to register for and start the course. And of course, if you complete the course, there is a certificate of completion which will be emailed to you. But for now, I'm going to pick up from a couple of questions that have been put into the chat. And there are a few different questions about how the course might and how researchers might approach especially difficult to reach children. So there have been some questions about whether we look at children with disabilities, children who may have refugee status. And so maybe just if we could have a little bit of an idea from the panel about how the course really touches on being able to undertake research in a way which is inclusive of children and finding them where they are at. So I'm not sure who, I think most of the panelists will be able to tackle this one. So maybe Camille, if I start with you.
I'm happy to start, but please pitch in. It's such a good question, and I think it's an ongoing challenge. And I think one of the things to say is, because of the limits in a course like this, we can't address the specific scenarios and the specifics of lots of different children's biographies and identities and circumstances. So it is about thinking about principles that support an inclusive approach throughout, I think. And I think at each stage, each module, we address that separately. So there's a lot of emphasis on thinking about intersectionality within our approaches to research, thinking from the start about power relationships, which actually are at the heart of participation. And I think often when we think about participation, we think about the difference in power between us as professional researchers and adults and children. And actually, we also need to think about power relationships between different groups of children and communities of children, and those who may be more likely to be heard and included and those who aren't. And I think sometimes addressing those issues starts with an awareness and increasing visibility of the barriers to that. So I think hopefully that's one of the things we've encouraged reflection on. And I think also within the kind of module 3 on ethics and safety and well-being, there are also components which specifically address how that will play out differently for different groups of young people. I'm aware that's a short answer to a very big question, but I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything.
Great. The next question is a little bit of a tricky one, and I'm going to direct this one first to Helen. Of course, we have an entire module which is dedicated to the sort of safety, well-being, and the ethical components of doing participatory research. So we have a question about how we should deal with achieving parental consent, and especially parental consent in a situation where there may be children who have experienced sexual violence, which may be related to parents, and so where there may be tensions in asking for children's consent. So Helen, could you give us a little bit of an idea of how researchers might approach this dilemma?
Again, this will be a short answer to a very big question, but it's a really important question. So thank you to whoever raised it. We actually look at this specific issue within the ethics section of the course, because very often ethics procedures, the approvals you need to do research, have quite simplistic understandings and requirements around parental consent and don't actually think about the importance of context. So we think, for example, about how you word your approach to getting consent for parents and how important it is to hold parental consent alongside the best interests of the child. And sometimes actually a parent finding out about the young person taking part in research may actually place them at greater harm than there would be benefit. And so we share an example of how even with your language, for example, in an ethics application, you can talk about these are our general approaches to parental consent, but unless that's contrary to the best interests of the child, because that has to be held alongside parental consent. And so we think of some practical ways in which, and we share links to people who've thought about these things, that you can think about other ways around this where it's not appropriate. For example, in some of our research, we've been able to, a practitioner with sufficient understanding of the child has been able to support the consent process where we recognise that going to a parent could actually be problematic. Now, obviously, what you can do differs according to different ages of children, the different contexts within which you're working in, because that will be different for all of us. But we do start to unpack some of that in the ethics section of the course.
Thanks so much, Helen. Is there anyone else who wants to chime in at all? Okay. We have another question, and this one's quite interesting for me and also to think about. It's around a question about, do we need to be doing research specifically on childhood sexual violence, or working, does the research need to be with, are we able to do this kind of research even if we're not yet directly working with adults who are affected by sexual violence in their childhood or children? So is this something that we could apply to other topics of research? So Claire, I'm wondering whether you might take a stab at this one.
Yeah, thanks. Happy to. Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think, as we've spoken about, the course is pitched as an introduction really to this area of work. But I think within this, it gives a really good background and foundation if you are interested in taking a participatory approach with any groups of children and young people in communities as well. I think what would probably be quite helpful is module 2 in this course that talks about planning and designing. So if it's something that you're interested in doing in the future, I think looking at these, the different modules to think about what's the kind of food for thought, what should I be thinking about? What partners could I potentially put in place to do this work? What are some of the resources and the skills that we need to have in place to do this work? So my opinion would be that it's a really useful course, even if you're not particularly working with this group, because I think it will provide ideas, examples that can be applied to different contexts and different groups as well. So I can see, yeah, it's something that I think whatever stage you're at, whether you're an early career researcher, whether you're more experienced but don't have that background in participatory research, I think it would be a really useful course for providing ideas and, yeah, getting plans in place. I don't know if anyone else would like to say anything else. No.
Thanks, Claire. We have another question about, and this actually came up during the needs assessment and the piloting and so on. So this question is for Joanne. Of course, the topic of participatory approaches is a big one. And not only that, actually putting what people learn in the course into practice. Something that we're quite deliberate in the course about saying is that you really do need other research skills. You need to make sure that you have other support and supervision. And so there's a bit of a question about, is this a kind of a standalone course, or what other resources or scaffolding is available around the course beyond the online course? So Joanne, would you be able to kind of give an idea of the kind of beyond doing this online course, the other offerings of SBRI to people in the field who are wanting to put this into practice?
Thank you, Jean, and thanks for that question. I think what we've been hearing as we were developing this course, and even as we were engaging, in the process of the course development, was the need for a community. And that's something that we need to start putting the lessons that we're learning from this whole process, the lessons that we're learning, and also seeing how we can bring together a community, because it's something that's really coming up from the needs assessments, from the content advisory group, from the piloting group, that there needs to be a community that supports each other as a resource, that continuously engages on this topic, learns from each other. And so I think once we launch this course, one of the next steps may be to sit together as a course development team and think about, well, how can we move forward? How can we think about a community? What is feasible? Where can we draw resources from? And how can we come together to just create a community? Because I think this is an essential topic that needs a community of, young researchers or experienced researchers to learn from each other and to engage more deeply beyond this course.
Thanks, Joanne. My next question, and I think this will be the last question, I'll direct it to Sylvie. And the question is, are there any best practices from countries of having children involved in co-creating some of the data collection tools, methods, and the dissemination, not only as participants, but making the process as human-centered throughout the research cycle? So Sylvie, maybe you could tackle this one.
Yes, thank you very much, Jean, for that question. As Camille said during the earlier stages of this webinar, we talk about participation not just as involving children as information or data givers, but actually broadening the scope for them to influence different aspects of the research process and cycle. And we do provide throughout this course different case examples that speak to that point and give example, for example, the Small Steps study from Albania, but also Janelle Rape, who's a PhD researcher. She talks about her very exciting research project where she co-designed research methods with young people who are affected by sexual violence. So hopefully that will give some examples of how to do this.
Thanks so much, Sylvie, and the rest of the panel. And also thank you for the questions. And you can keep putting questions in the chat right until the end, and we'll keep doing our best to answer them all. Nelly, back to you.
Thank you, Jean. For those of you who were wondering, I didn't introduce Jean. Dr. Jean Elphick is from TDH Netherlands, and she's been behind the scenes the whole time leading and producing this course. And thank you so much for facilitating the Q&A session, Jean. So again, emphasis, sign up, register, please do the course. From my side, what is left to do is to thank the panelists for joining and for their really invaluable roles in developing this course. We also had an overwhelming number of you registering for this launch webinar. We would like to thank you all for joining us on a Friday, and hope to see you all completing the module. And so with lots of gratitude, I hand over to Joanne for us to close.
Sorry. Thank you so much, Nelly. As you come to the close of this session, I would just like to take this moment to, on behalf of the SVRI and the course development team, to thank everyone who has been part of this course development team. A heartfelt thanks to our members who participated in the needs assessments, the content advisory group, and the piloting group who gave their inputs and advice at different in the development of the different modules, and everyone who generously shared their insights and experiences throughout this course. We really cannot thank you enough for your entire participation. And lastly, I'd like to extend a special thank you to the Oak Foundation for the invaluable support which has made this initiative possible. And so with those remarks, I officially close this webinar, and thank you once again for your time and engagement. And we look forward to seeing you engage with the course. Thank you so much. Take care.